Welcome. I'm Amy Kundrat, the Director of Innovation Community here at Yale Ventures, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to one of our first panels, Social Entrepreneurship, Funding and Founders. As one of the first panels at this year's Innovation Summit held at Yale SOM, the home of business and society, I find this to be the perfect place to host a conversation that showcases the inspiring stories and impact-driven work of founders and funders. Today, you'll hear from a group of social entrepreneurs who have launched or funded ventures with the goal of creating positive social and environmental change. Today's panel is moderated by my innovation colleague and friend, KP Yalpala. KP is a global entrepreneur and public health practitioner with experience working across the public and private sectors in the US, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Caribbean. He is a senior fellow and lecturer at the Yale School of Public Health and the faculty director for Innovate Health. He co-founded In On Health in 2018 to improve access to care in the US using digital communication channels and consumer insights to better connect multicultural populations to healthcare services. Prior to In On Health, he also founded Access Mobile International, a global digital health company that develops solutions to improve access to health information and services in African countries. KP served as one of the early employees of the Clinton Health Access Initiative and worked as a management consultant for Dahlberg Global Development Advisors. He's a member of the External Equity and Innovation Advisory Board for the American Medical Association and was appointed by Governor Jared Polis to serve on the Colorado eHealth Commission, which he chairs. KP received his BA with honors from Brown and a Master of Public Health from the Yale School of Public Health. So please join me today in welcoming today's moderator, KP Yalpala.
Thank you so much, Amy. Appreciate that generous intro. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today and our panelists. We're looking forward to having a great conversation about social entrepreneurship. But before we go into that, I just want to give a little bit of context into kind of how we'll approach the conversation. I think first, why social entrepreneurship? Why talk about that theme now as one of the opening themes of the Yale Innovation Summit? So we're going to kind of spend some time unpacking that, what that means. We've got some tremendous innovators and leaders here as panelists, and so they're going to share their perspectives, and we'll kind of go down that rabbit hole, if I can say. And then we'll want to make sure to have some time to open it up for Q&A and have conversation with all of you. So to get us warmed up, I first want to share, like, when I kind of came to Yale, so I graduated from the Yale School of Public Health many moons ago. I was someone who was entrepreneurial and cared a lot about public health, right? And it's been amazing to see how innovation entrepreneurship has grown around campus. But my journey involved working in large nonprofits, founding a nonprofit in Ghana, which is my family's country of origin. I was born in the US, my family's from Ghana. And then after that, started 2 different venture-backed companies. So I like to say, I haven't really found an answer to some of these solutions, but I've definitely found what's not worked, which it's part of why I'm here, is to share what I've learned doesn't work, which is part of getting to what can work. And so I want to kind of open us up with intros from our colleagues here. So first, Allison, love to hear from you, to let our audience know who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do.
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining this early panel. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. I'm Allison Byers. I'm the founder and CEO of a tech company named Scroobius. We quickly drive innovation by removing barriers to partnerships for founders, for investors, and for providers. I'm also an activist in the space of equal capital allocation and co-authored the new law. We signed into law this past year, California Senate Bill 54, which will require venture funds to publicly report diversity metrics about their previous year's investments, and I've been involved in a number of other legislative efforts. And my why for me is, during my career, I've experienced 2 major roadblocks, and they were both gender-based. My first roadblock is after a decade of being a tech operator, and a very successful one in venture-backed companies, I was actually forced out of my career when I returned from maternity leave. And I had a career break. I did not know how to work. entrepreneurship is what allowed me to re-enter my career and put my skills to the use that I want. So that sparked my deep passion for entrepreneurship as a career path. And then my second roadblock came during that journey. I had started, I helped found and then ran a medical device company where I raised about $10 million and was challenged to raise our Series B, which sparked an early acquisition. Again, I have full conviction that gender was a roadblock to raising our Series B for that company, and that is what led me down the path of investigating what capital distribution looks like, how does fundraising work, and how can we make demonstrable change so that we have economic freedom for all of those innovators who are looking to build those ventures and that wealth.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Alfonso?
Good morning. Alfonso David. It's really strange when you have to describe who you are through the lens of what you do. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a social activist. I'm a change maker. I have spent most of my life focusing on social justice and economic justice. I spent 12 years in government, worked at the Attorney General's office in New York, litigating cases all over the state of New York, from employment discrimination cases to housing to credit and lending cases. I worked at Lambda Legal, which is a LGBTQ civil rights organization, where I got to litigate the first marriage equality case in New York. I worked in the governor's office, where I had the privilege of drafting legislation from criminal justice reform to economic opportunity practices and legislation. I ran the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program for about 8 years in the state of New York. I ran the Human Rights Campaign, which is a LGBTQ civil rights organization. And now I'm the president and CEO of the Global Black Economic Forum, which is a global enterprise that's focused on breaking down the barriers to economic opportunity for marginalized communities, and specifically focusing on the Black diaspora. So you can probably appreciate the through line for all of my jobs and all of the positions that I've taken, which is really trying to deconstruct this concept of equity and equality and trying to identify all of the barriers that exist and coming up with new models to create a true sense of equity. And I have seen in my professional and my personal life obstacles that have been created as a result of either race or ethnicity or other characteristics. I'm originally from Liberia, West Africa. I grew up there for 14 years, lived under a democracy for 14 years or 10 years of my life, only to find one morning waking up and it shifted to a dictatorship with rebel soldiers at our front doors trying to kill us. And sort of understanding this really, as a 10-year-old child, what is this concept of democracy and freedom? And how do we tangibly sort of incorporate that into our lives? And so I shifted from trying to study medicine to the law. And now understanding and trying to break down barriers for entrepreneurship and social innovation.
Amazing. Thank you, Alfonso. And we'll get more into that in a moment. Steph, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steph Spears. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Solstice. We're a community solar company connecting households and businesses to shared solar farms across the country. I'm also on the board of Vote Solar and the Sierra Club Foundation, so environmental nonprofits. And when I graduated from Yale as an undergrad, I immediately joined the first Obama campaign and spent 5 years in that world, working as a community organizer, and then later joining the administration as in Middle East policy and national security. And then after that, I went to India and Pakistan working on renewable energy companies and impact investment. And following that experience, I started Solstice with my co-founders. And Solstice is trying to put affordable solar in the hands of every American, because 4 out of 5 Americans cannot actually put solar on the rooftop. And when we think about social entrepreneurship, I think I came to this journey because my mom was an immigrant, a single mom who, when you're an immigrant, you give up your native language, your home, everything you've ever known, and you go out in the future and you forge a future that no one can yet see, but you can only imagine. And entrepreneurship is like that. And that's what we need to deconstruct some of the most extractive, harmful systems that we currently live in. And so I'm excited to talk more about that today.
Great. Thank you, Steph. Travis?
Yeah, so I'm Travis Whitfill. I've sat on a couple ends of the entrepreneurship table. 2014 grad of the School of Public Health here at Yale. Can't believe it's been 10 years. And also have never left. So I'm currently an adjunct professor in pediatrics and emergency medicine here, studying the disparities in pediatric care between community and academic hospitals. And when I was in grad school here, I also co-founded a company called Azitra, which is developing next-gen therapies for skin diseases to create cheaper therapies that are more accessible to people and addressing unmet needs in dermatology. And I'm the chief operating officer of that, and IPO'd last year. But in between co-founding the company and taking it public, I spent 10 years in venture capital in biotech, funding early stage biotech in pharma companies with high unmet needs, with mostly focus on oncology and Alzheimer's, but in other diseases where there's no approved treatment options.
Amazing. Thank you, Travis. One of the things I'm so excited about with this group is, as you've heard, the diversity of experiences, right? So I think that we're going to get a rich and kind of diverse set of views on this topic. So I just want to start by talking about social entrepreneurship. So as I was preparing for our conversation, I came across an article that I remembered from some years ago. It was written in the Stanford Social Innovation Review. And the article was written maybe about 10 or 15 years ago. And the title is All Entrepreneurship is Social Entrepreneurship. It was a contrarian view, basically making the case that, successful entrepreneurs change the way we do things, change the way we live. It basically was making a case about the inherent social impact, inherent positive social impact of entrepreneurship as a framework, right? And this article got a lot of traction. I mean, you can imagine the debates. So, I want to start by hearing from all of you about, how you see what social entrepreneurship is, how you see the distinction between entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. So I'll open the floor.
Reminds me of when I was in impact investing, people used to talk about how all investing is impact investing. You
Right.
could have a positive impact or you could have a negative impact. And in that same way, yes, all entrepreneurship affects the social systems we live in, and you can only become a successful enterprise if you can rally people around your cause. Like, people are the core, most important capital that we should be talking about. And in entrepreneurship, we often will only talk about financial capital when it's really social capital and human capital that makes you successful or not. And so, because financial capital flows from those two things. Mm-hmm. And so when we think of social entrepreneurship at Solstice, it's how do we imagine a system that works better than the current system? For example, a lot of people don't know this, but in order to get solar in this country, you need a FICO score of 680 and above, which half the country doesn't have, because you have to access either financing or you have to pay for it upfront yourself, which is like $15,000 to $40,000. Most of the country doesn't have the right FICO credit score.
Right.
So we said, what if we created a new type of credit score? FICO was invented in 1956. It's supposed to be an objective measure of creditworthiness. It's not objective. It doesn't measure your cell phone history, your utility bill history. It doesn't measure your rental bill history. And so we created an alternative mechanism for measuring people's proclivity to pay their utility bill. And we use that as the metric to qualify customers for solar. And we found that a lot of low-income people who get rejected with their FICO credit score can now qualify for clean energy. So it's not just about creating the perfect product. Sometimes you have to create the financial distribution systems or the financing in order to get that product out there.
And I just want to build on this before we hear from the others, because what you're also inferring is you're tapping into an untapped into market, right? So I'm sure when you were pitching this, if someone was to say, what's the total addressable market for this? You're talking about people that weren't typically included. So can you kind of unpack that more? Because it sounds like that becomes the social part of entrepreneurship, is that you're going after a segment that historically had been excluded for this reason you're describing.
So having grown up on food stamps, my mom used to say, just because we don't have a good credit score does not mean we're bad people. And that stuck with me my whole life. But, opportunity is not universal, but talent is universal. And yet there's all these misconceptions about low-income folks. Like, they're a monolith. They're all the same. They don't buy goods. They're not consumers. And all of that is just plain wrong. But our assessment of risk is what's wrong. When we are talking about inclusion or not, it's often these biased views of what is risky. And so if we can unpack, okay, why do you think this is risky? What's playing into that? What data is playing into that? Can we rewrite that and create a level playing field? So yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. It's more equity in a system that is built not to be equitable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think this conversation is going down a line that we often hear, where social entrepreneurship is sometimes in conflict with the idea of capitalism, right? And it really is both. It's the social piece and the entrepreneurship piece, where there is a market opportunity and it is capitalistic, and you can achieve both social impact and financial return. And I think it can be very challenging, particularly for founders who do identify as underrepresented, which is the community I primarily work with, because when we talk about social entrepreneurship, it is sometimes heard as charity, or we're told, why don't you just be a nonprofit? And we're not building businesses that fit that model. And just because you work in untapped spaces or with those who've been marginalized, it doesn't mean that this is a charity case. And it doesn't mean that it isn't a huge investment potential opportunity where you can generate a lot of alpha because you are going into untapped networks. So it's a really interesting term, social entrepreneur, because it can be interpreted in so many different ways depending on the lens that you're looking through and the environment that you're in.
Right. I want to talk about impact investing and returns in that context. But before that, I want to hear from Alfonso and Travis on this current thread, if there's anything that you want to share or add.
I'll just say, when I think of the concept of impact investing, I often start with disparities. I often start with structural problems. I often start with, institutional challenges that we're looking to change. Like both of my colleagues said, look, if you're in business to make money. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if the underlying premise of entering into a business enterprise is to make money without the regard of the impact that you could have on social, on people, then that's a different sort of business enterprise. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But when I think of addressing the social ills of society, for example, venture capitalism, let's just use that. Right? So I represent the Fearless Fund, which is a venture capital firm. It was started by two Black women who are looking to close a disparity in the venture capital space. $288 billion is allocated each year through the venture capital space. Only 0.03% goes to Black women. So that's a disparity. They created a company and a charitable organization to close that gap. That's social entrepreneurship, because they're looking to address a systemic inequity within our systems. Now, they could decide just to start a business without really focusing on addressing that disparity. But for me, that's the core of social entrepreneurship.
Okay. Travis, I want to hear from you.
Yeah, I think for me, social entrepreneurship, I think there's two different facets to it. I think it's what you're investing in, and then how and who you're investing in as well. So in health, you had mentioned a comment earlier that innovation and social entrepreneurship are indistinguishable. I think that's how it should be, but I think that's not how it happens. I think in the health space, for example, I can't help but think about the opioid crisis and how that changed the world. That was very successful. They made a lot of money, but it also had a huge detriment to society. So I think for me, social entrepreneurship is focusing on the good for society over profits. And I think that's where I kind of draw the distinction. And also, I think it's important to of how that's done. As an investor, I think it was really important to look at the diversity in the teams that we hired. Because in biotech, there was a 2019 study that came out that of the top 100 company CEOs, there were more guys named Mike than there were women CEOs. So just really, yeah, I think seven Mikes and then 6 women of the 100 companies. So it's a really big problem, and there's even fewer people of color in biotech. So I think as an investor, it's really important to invest in diverse teams, and especially in something like health, where if you just have a bunch of white people deciding health outcomes and drugs and clinical trials where there's not enough representation, that becomes a huge problem when you're thinking about generalizing that to the overall population.
Interesting. So I want to bring in the concept of capital allocations. I think we're kind of naturally flowing there. And so let's just talk about returns. So as you heard in my bio, I founded 2 different venture-backed companies. One of them, In on Health, was working on closing gaps in care for low-income and multicultural populations in the U.S. And we built a business that scaled rapidly. We scaled through the pandemic. We were going out for a Series A. And one of the things that I observed about kind of thinking about the venture capital model is the question often is, how much profit are we talking about, right? Because, my company could be very profitable. The question was the returns profile of my company aligned with the returns profile of what venture capital is looking for? And oftentimes that's misaligned, right? And the perception, I used to say, there's a cost to building trust, right? And who's going to bear that cost? So health equity-centered models are often about trust. And there's a cost to it. You have to pay for it. So that was how I would explain that, look, my returns might be a little bit less, right, from a financial perspective, because I'm investing in trust building and trust as infrastructure. However, I'm still building a profitable business. Now, when you look at a VC that has a pool of opportunities, they're looking at 10 opportunities, and my one has a lot of social impact, which isn't in their measurement, as we're talking about. I think this is a lot of what happens, is it's not only the perception of equity and social entrepreneurship potentially being charity, but this is actually about returns profiles and what is the actual trade-off between financial and social impact. And I don't think there's consensus in the market. So I think, so I'm just curious to hear as I frame it that way, right? And I know we have investors here, we have entrepreneurs, and there's other layers on underrepresentation, but I do want to talk about this issue for a bit. So what do you guys think?
Happy to take it on. I challenge the premise that if you fund those who are interested in social investing or social entrepreneurship, that you will have a lower rate of return. I think the opposite is actually true.
Okay.
When you look at companies like 1863 Ventures or even your company, and you look at the rate of return that they're getting, is substantially higher than most people that get venture capital dollars. Mm. And the practical reality is people fund people who they feel comfortable with. And in some cases, who they look like. And unless we admit that that is what's actually happening, we talk about it through this guise of return on investment. Mm-hmm. But when you really look at women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, and the rate of return that they're actually getting is substantially higher.
Yeah, there's multiple studies that document that. And so there's a few things when you were talking that came to mind, right? One is venture capital is its own business with its own business model, and it was only ever meant to be appropriate for a subset of startups, right? It is not the appropriate source of capital for a lot of businesses, which is fine, but we've romanticized it in the popular press, and we've made it seem like that is the goal, that you win if you raise a big round. The capital is just a vehicle to growing a successful business. And there are multiple vehicles to obtain that capital. It doesn't have to be venture. That being said, when it is the appropriate source of capital and it is so inequitably distributed, we heard that absurd statistic from Alfonso, it almost doesn't seem real, right? Flip it around. Even let's take women as a whole. We get 1.8% of venture capital dollars. 98% of venture capital dollars are not accessible by women founding teams. Let's take Black founders, right? Let's split apart the Black women into the intersectional groups. Black founders get 0.5%. 99.5% of venture capital dollars are not available to Black founding teams. A lot of it comes down to this issue of signal processing and the risk tolerance and risk profile, whereby investors look for signals of new opportunities that match things they have seen before in successful investments that have returned for them. But it's a homogeneous data set. So you're looking for signals that you will not find in founders who don't match the demographic profiles of those who have already been funded. And so, it's a little bit of a long-winded way of explaining the mechanisms behind that. Why do we invest in people that look like us? Because we view them as inherently less risky, and we're matching that homogeneous data set. It doesn't mean that your returns would not have been just as high on both the social impact measurements and the financial elements.
Interesting. Great. What do you guys think?
So that stat of less than 2% of VC goes to women founders, that has been the same in the last 10 years. It has not changed since when I first started raising money 10 years ago. So
80 years. It's been the same for the entire length of the venture capital industry.
Yeah. And part of it is because there are not enough women venture capitalists and people of color venture capitalists and fund managers. And there are women in this room who are running funds, who are trailblazers. But I also want to pick up on what you said, KP, about trust costs money, and then tie that with what you said, Alfonso, about how there's, it's not always true that doing the social or just thing has to mean lower returns. So that is, I think, I completely agree. When a year and a half ago, Solstice sold to a large Japanese conglomerate. And at the time when I was considering selling the company, one of my funders, who has run an impact investment fund for decades, said, the truth of the matter is, it's not actually a proven asset class yet.
You're right.
There are not a ton of exits in the impact investment space. And she said, do you know how many of my portfolio companies have actually exited? Less than a third after doing it for many years. Do you know what the return profile was? 1.5x. Do you know how many of them were women founders? 0 of them. So her push was actually, you should sell your company because we have to keep proving that socially driven, mission-driven companies can actually exit, else this asset class is over. And so we're kind of living in the moment in which we have to say there is not a trade-off between making money and doing good in the world, because it is true. Factually, climate is a really good example of that. You can build climate tech companies, and a lot of wealth is going to be generated in the next decade from climate tech companies, and they're all going to help the world survive and thrive. But the deeper, I think, the social justice impact, there is a little bit of a trade-off. A very concrete example is, we hired someone, a product manager, a few years ago. She was earning a certain salary. And because inflation has increased so much in the last several years, we hired a new product manager at a new higher salary. And I went to my board and I said, I want to take the first woman and give her $30K extra, even though she's doing the same job, for pay equity. And my board said, why would you do that? You don't have to. She doesn't know that the other person is earning more money. And it was in that moment that I realized that it matters if people have this sensibility and they're in the room, because you don't know a lot, when you're at the top levels of power, you can get away with a lot. And so we have to hold ourselves accountable. It's also a reason for good policy that helps hold us accountable. But there's so many ways to have impact, yes. And you can make a lot of money and have a lot of impact, but we have to be thoughtful about what kind of impact we're having, and if it's the appropriate kind of impact that's actually going to change the systems we live in.
Did you get board approval?
I got board approval. She's earning $30K more.
Nice.
Yeah, I want to totally agree with your point about diverse teams historically perform better. I think that's been proven in a lot of different contexts and scenarios. But it's something that you said about having women in venture capital and being represented. In my experience, that's not exactly hasn't really helped, because I used to work with two partners on my VC firm that were women. And in one of the contexts, I was hiring a CEO, and she and I were on the same board. We were trying to hire a CEO. I was working with a search firm, and I said, I want you to bring back diverse candidates for the CEO position. And then so they came back and brought back 13 candidates. 11 were white men, 1 woman, and a person of color. And I got a lot of pushback from my partner, Stella, who she was like, we want to, I don't know about this. This is really making me nervous. We want to prioritize the best qualified candidate over diversity. And I was like, okay, well, here's a list of 10, 15 people in the same field that I think would be excellent candidates. But I've faced pushback even from women at the VC level. So it's, even if you have that representation, it doesn't always translate to them wanting to invest in the right team. So it's been a really frustrating process.
And I think that goes to a bit of the signaling and kind of how that influences biases as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, being a woman in VC, where she had to break the ceiling in so many ways and throughout the decades, I think she, kind of was a little bit jaded. We didn't end up hiring the 1 person of color from the 13 candidates, who also happened to be the most qualified. But the uphill battle that I faced doing that was just really frustrating. So I think, that's not always the answer, is having representation at the VC level, although I think it really helps, and that's a great first step. But I think a lot of times, this idea of risk profile, I think, VC is a very risky asset class, and I think that can be supplemented by other forms of capital, especially from the government. I think the government has a really good role in taking on the risk of some of this that they are lacking on, and can take on some of that risk to help kind of de-risk the venture capital to fund social.
I want to talk a bit about solutions and where we go from here. And I think you guys have done a wonderful job of sharing the nuance of these issues. I also acknowledge that this panel, it was kind of intentional. We're talking about social entrepreneurship, but we have a lot of private sector orientation. There are plenty of people who would argue social entrepreneurship truly, honestly, is really driven by nonprofit organizations or nonprofit models, right? And that's, I want to acknowledge that that's a huge perspective in the field, right? I think we're kind of explaining why there's room for both for-profit, nonprofit, and even hybrid structures around social innovation and entrepreneurship. But I do want to touch on how you guys view the nonprofit sector and its role in social entrepreneurship, because I know for some people in the audience and others that are in the field, that's more their orientation. And then I want us to get into some solutioning, and we'll open up Q&A. How do you guys see nonprofit models?
Solstice started as a nonprofit, actually. And it was a nonprofit for 2 years, and then we spun out a software company because we realized software is a really important part of making things accessible to people. And so having run the nonprofit continues to exist. Having run a nonprofit and a for-profit, we often get asked the question, like, when you're starting something that is so socially focused, should you do it in a nonprofit structure, or should you do it in a for-profit structure? And it's actually very simple. The answer is, do you think you can be profitable? It is not enough to make revenue and be a for-profit. If you have a revenue model, you can do that in a nonprofit too, but can you be profitable? Can you actually make a return? Because that is actually how you will be able to raise funding for your organization. And the kinds of business models that can be extremely profitable and the kinds of business models that can make a revenue but would need some grant subsidization are really different. And we have, modeling that out will tell you a lot. But one thing we say in climate is an all hands on deck problem. We need it all. We need the nonprofits. We need the for-profits. We need the government organizations. And you can't solve these issues with just one sector. You need all of the sectors. And so, yeah, nonprofits have a huge role to play because they fill in the gaps that are created by market failures. But government is also a really important mechanism that creates the rules that allow us to have a level playing field.
I mean, yeah, that resonates. And, in part of my role working with our lovely new dean, Dr. Megan Ranney at the Yale School of Public Health, we're talking about this because one of her 4 pillars is about the role of innovation, entrepreneurship, and public health. I think some of what we're trying to do with young innovators is help them process that question earlier in their journeys. What am I trying to solve? What's the best method or model for that? Can it be profitable? Should it be a nonprofit, for-profit, VC or not? I think young innovators would benefit from going through that thought process as they're thinking about their solutions. It's one of the ways we're thinking about innovators in public health and how to steward them through that process early in their journey. So that resonates deeply. Any other comments on this before we?
Yeah, I fully agree. And in order to affect demonstrable, measurable change on a large social issue, you have to have collaboration among private industry, nonprofits, and the public sector. It just doesn't work if you don't have that, and all 3 play a critical role. I'm going to tie in, Travis, what you said a little bit, where it's not just the access to capital or the model by which you are building a business. It's who holds seats of power while you're building. And what do you want that to be? When you're an entrepreneur, you get to decide, and fully understanding the system by which you're launching your venture into plays a big part of that. If you're in private industry and you decide you're going to go for equity funding, who holds the power? It's not you. It's your board. It's your investors. And if you don't have representation, like 1 woman, not enough. 2 women, not enough. 3 women, maybe enough.
Maybe.
Or pick your demographic. But you have to have enough equality and representation in seats of power that you feel you can affect the change that you want to make, or you can build the business that you want to build. You can hire who you want to hire in your company because the board says that. You can pay them what you want, the board says that. So are you able to build the seats of power that you want to build? And it's different for a nonprofit business structure. It's different if you're working in public policy. All of them have their issues with bias and inequity. But can you make a space where you feel you can win? And that has to be part of your decision.
Yeah, that's great insight. I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. So one of the things I was looking into, so a lot of you may be familiar with Ashoka. They've been one of the leading organizations supporting social entrepreneurs globally. And they have their framework for social change. And it's basically 4 concentric circles, right? The inner circle is direct service. The next circle is direct scaled service. The next circle is systems change. And the outermost circle is framework changes. I think you guys can infer the 2 inner circles are intuitive, right? Systems change is some of what we talk about, and you can see some of our colleagues here, actually all of them are involved in that. And framework change is very much like hearts and minds, right? And I think I thought about that because thinking about the backgrounds here, even my own journey started in that most concentric circle. And as you start to see some of the different types of barriers, I think some of us find our way out trying to think about systems change, trying to think about policy framework, how to create an enabling environment, right? I think oftentimes one of the challenges for social entrepreneurs is that to do what you want to do, to transform anything where there's a deep justice or injustice that's happening, you end up having to work through all these different layers at once, honestly. And I think about you, Alfonso, Allison, everyone here is kind of working through that. So I think as a final kind of parting thought before we open up Q&A, can each of you share kind of how that resonates with you when you think about your journey, and where's the hope? What's going to work to move this, and how can people in this audience get involved in different layers of enhancing this issue and thinking about entrepreneurship that really solves society's problems? So I know it's a big question, but you guys are thoughtful, so you can give us a kind of some parting wisdom, and then I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. Travis, I'll start with you. Sorry.
Well, you had asked what can we look to be hopeful for. There's a lot of problems in the world today, but I think venture capital is exploding, and even though there's been a lot of turmoil in the public markets, there's still so much dry powder left in venture capital, and I think if we can work together with the VC sector, private sector, and the government and nonprofits, I think it really takes working together. For me, I think that should be facilitated by the government, but I think if those work together to deploy that capital, I think that's could be positive. There's a lot more dollars to be deployed.
Great.
There's a journalist named Carl T. Rowan, and he said the status quo has never been our God, and we don't bow down to it. And if you look at the history of America, that we have always changed. What gives me hope is that ordinarily you wouldn't have many. There aren't that many women CEOs in climate. There are more and more, thankfully, thanks to some investors like one in the room, Elemental Accelerator, one of our investors, Don Lippert runs that. But there are not enough women founders and not enough women founders in climate who have exited. And and yet that happened to us. We from day one have been saying we are going to prioritize serving low-income customers. 50% of our customers are low-income, which means as a household, they're earning less than $40K a year. And we were able to sell to a Japanese conglomerate, which is not easy because they are very precise, and their due diligence is intense.
Yeah.
And we did it because we ran a good business, but also because we were able to do it all throughout by providing good benefits, like 6 weeks of PTO a year and giving people health insurance and having 4 months off of parental leave. Like you can build organizations that do actually shift the norm of what is possible. It doesn't happen all of a sudden, obviously, and it took us 6 years to exit. But every year we implemented something else in our company that we thought was helping us become a more just and equitable organization. And so it's possible because other people allow us to believe it's possible. If I have seen farther, it's because I stood on the giant of my single mom who sacrificed everything to allow me to come to Yale and have a good education and start a company while she worked in a call center. And so it is possible. We just have to work together. We have to stand on each other's shoulders and lift each other's up and not pull up the ladder when we get to the top.
Yeah. Thank you. Alfonso?
Sobering words.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to date myself by saying this, but what gives me hope are young people, and some of the people on the stage, because they are challenging our perception of what is normal, what is appropriate, what is successful, and forcing us to reevaluate whether or not those philosophies, constructs, paradigms should be deconstructed for us to really break down some of the silos that we exist in today. So I'll give you 2 examples. I have 2 sisters. Both have undergone surgeries, and they're going to kill me for saying this publicly, but it's important, for fibroids. More than 90% of Black women in this country will get fibroids in their lifetime. More than 60 or 70% of Latinas. It is not a public health crisis. And yet, it affects the majority of women of color. So as we think about social entrepreneurship, when we talk about we're here, where it's public health, there's an opportunity to really rethink some of the deeply embedded systemic problems that people confront in communities of color that will also be profitable.
Yeah.
Second, because I'm a lawyer, I'm litigating a lot of cases around the country. And the Fearless Fund case that I mentioned to you is an important case for us to understand what's happening culturally. Because there's a narrative shifting that's happening where it is now, in some circles, acceptable to say diversity means less qualified. You can say that publicly and it be legitimate in some circles. And I think there is a moment that we have not to only challenge those concepts in a court of law, but to challenge them in spaces like this, and to really have a different conversation about why that narrative shifting is so important for us to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Alfonso. Allison?
Yeah, I mean, these have all been really powerful insights on what we're hopeful about for change. And I can tell you for me, I work with and run in circles of hundreds of underestimated, overlooked, whatever you want to call it, founders and investors. I'm in all private, nonprofit, and public policy spaces. I have never felt the type of groundswell movement that I am feeling now, where people who have seen success in their careers and run in powerful circles are fed up and they are done, and they have money and they have power and they are looking to collaborate proactively. And I think we are experiencing that shift. And it's because of things like Fearless Fund and these cases that are being brought about and laws that are taking away rights that we have had for a long time. It has shifted this sense of collaboration that has not existed, because when you're traditionally marginalized, you usually have an embedded scarcity mindset. And you actually aren't as open to collaboration as you think, because you look at things as if someone else is getting this. I know there's a limited amount. I'm not going to be able to get it. I got to go out on my own. And it prohibits collaboration and prohibits progress. That's being broken right now. And there's also a blending in capital strategies that combines both investment and philanthropy in new models that we're just seeing the beginning of. So it's a little bit grandiose to, what I'm saying, but it's true. I really do believe we're going to see collaboration among sectors and among people within these groups that have the ability to enact change in a way that we haven't seen before. And that gives me a lot of energy, and I hope it does for you all too.
Great. Thank you so much. Some really good insights. I want to open it up for a few questions. I see them. I don't know if we have mics. Great. I see a few hands. Just for a couple. Yeah, I want to make sure we get them in.
Hi, thanks everyone. My name is Miles Braxton. I'm the co-founder of Oakabate Sustainable Energy. We develop community solar farms atop active farmland where crop farmers grow crops between the rows of our farmland and get double the income from that. Question around, ESG framework, we talked about environment, we talked about social. I think governance is really important in maintaining the impact that you want to have in your company. And Allison and Steph had mentioned that as well. What were some of the strategies you implemented kind of early on in your company to maintain that structure and maintain the impact that you wanted to see?
Picking your investors, and even if you're an early stage entrepreneur and it doesn't feel like it, you actually can reject investors. It didn't feel like it for me initially, and we made the mistake of bringing on investors who weren't values aligned with us. And when you're picking investors, you're picking a marriage, and it is a long-term relationship. Sometimes that will outlast some marriages. And so, and they have similar high expectations of you. And so being really clear about what your expectations are of each other, and then having the wherewithal to say, like, I can actually reject an investor even though it feels like I am finance scarce. And knowing a fast no is a gift because it gets you to a better fitting yes.
And I would say on the policy side, policy is way more accessible than you think it is. Like, I had no business co-authoring a law, right? I just got into this space 4 years ago. Like, what am I doing? But I am doing everything I do under the umbrella of equal access to capital. That's what I want to see. My company is a piece of it. Working on policy benefits my company and benefits my greater mission and all the work that I've been doing. You can access legislators. You can access policy, right? Legislative changes It's just like building a company. You're building new features, and you have to get the buy-in from your stakeholders. And how do you go about that? There's strategies to employ. You can call these people up. You can get involved. You can do grassroots efforts if you don't have a larger coalition with you. But think of that side of things. If you need that policy work to enable the business that you envision building, go get involved in it. That's part of building your company, even if it's not directly in that work.
Maybe a couple more, yeah?
Hi, my name is Nupur Garg, and I'm actually a physician. And we have seen time and time again as physicians, VCs actually coming into the healthcare space and sort of just like completely tearing it apart, making it worse for patient care. And as somebody who also is co-founder of a health tech company, what do you say to like people who are interested in getting funding and they have health tech and going to VCs and having a little bit of PTSD from that kind of sort of like environment where people are definitely going to try to maximize and make decisions based like solely on profits? What would you say to somebody? Like, is there a different investor landscape that we can look at? Or I feel like I'm already going to have a bad attitude when I go into a room with any VC just because of like, I just get so angry with sort of the environment they've created for patient care.
I can talk on the health side on that. I think that a lot of VCs, we call them vulture capitalists, where they want to take control of the company. And I think as a founder, I've been a founder, I think it was really important early on to not take VC money and kind of build it ourselves. So we took on grants, SBIR grants, STTR grants, and we looked at angel investors too. I think angel investors, they're a lot less, they have a lot less say than venture capitalists. So starting off with those smaller amounts and looking to get grant funding to get started, I think would really help you kind of get off the ground before you have to go to VC money, and then you can have more of a company built and more say at the table to push back against the VCs.
And I'll just say that there are more and more venture capitalists that are socially oriented with respect to their investing, and certainly happy to provide that information to KP.
Great. Well, we've come to our time. I know this conversation can continue, and I just want to thank these wonderful, brilliant, thoughtful panelists for being open and sharing with us. I have a feeling there may be some other questions, so maybe afterwards you can reach out or try to talk to our friends here. But thank you, everybody.